Welcome to the NDE Insight channel. Today, our narrator will be sharing her profound near-death experience, featuring encounters with family members, friends, and even the Virgin Mary. Before we delve into this extraordinary journey, let's take a brief prayer together. We pray for God's comforting and healing presence to embrace those facing pain, sorrow, grief, and any setbacks in life. Amen.
Hi, I am Missy. Today I am going to tell you my near-death experience. Before, I have always been a spiritual person, highly intuitive, and certain phases of my life brought me closer to this. When my mother passed away, I found myself angry, drifting away from God, unable to comprehend why such a remarkable and kind person had to go through such a thing. I essentially shut down my intuitive side, feeling generally disheartened about life. Just before her death, I moved to Alabama for a better job, settling my family in a place where we hoped to break free from some painful memories associated with my daughter. In Alabama, I regained my faith in God and also found a connection with angels, not surprising considering it is referred to as the Bible Belt. A series of events, some small steps, and others significant, helped me stop being so negative about life. My intuition became stronger, and I was no longer afraid of it. After living in Alabama for 4 years, my father passed away. I knew in my heart that he was now at peace. I continued to work on developing my spiritual side, paying attention to the messages I received. I remember a strange feeling when I flew back from Florida in early November 2020, sensing that I would get COVID-19 and it would be severe, but I would be okay. In the following weeks, I repeatedly sensed the same information. Each time, I tried not to be afraid or focus on it, pushing it aside. I spent Thanksgiving with my family, one of the best in a long time, as all my children were together, the first time in 8 years. It was truly a gift. A few days later, my husband started showing flu-like symptoms. Eventually, my daughter-in-law and I also developed similar symptoms. On December 3, 2020, with flu-like symptoms, we went to the local emergency room and underwent COVID-19 testing. The doctor advised us to monitor oxygen levels, take vitamin C, vitamin D3, and take cold medication as needed. At that time, my husband's COVID test came back positive. As my symptoms worsened, on December 5, 2020, I went to the same emergency room again, this time seeing a nurse and then a doctor. My husband had called ahead, informing them that my oxygen levels were sporadically dropping, and I was having difficulty walking and breathing. The doctor, upon seeing me, immediately told me I needed to go to the emergency room. I didn't feel that bad and really didn't want to go, but my husband insisted. Reluctantly, we followed the doctor's instructions, and he drove me to the hospital. My husband was not allowed to enter the hospital. They directed him to take me to the entrance designated for COVID patients. Placing me in a wheelchair, they took away my paperwork and wheeled me into the waiting area. In the brief time from the emergency room to when they called my name and measured my vital signs, I could barely walk. Feeling lonely, weak, and extremely frightened, I realized I might indeed have a serious problem. When the nurse saw me struggling to walk towards her, she came over and pushed me into a room behind. There, she measured my vital signs and drew blood from both my arms. I felt like crying, as I had never felt so weak and vulnerable. Then, she took me to see the emergency room doctor. He looked at me seriously, asked me some questions, and said they would admit me immediately. Next, they took me for a chest x-ray and wheeled me into a hospital room. They hooked me up to machines, started COVID treatment, provided oxygen, and began intravenous fluids. It wasn't until 5 days later that I realized I was in the ICU. The nurses were very kind, regularly checking if I needed anything and asking how I felt. One nurse explained that both my lungs were infected with COVID, and it would be very helpful if I could lie on my stomach. I explained that I hadn't been able to lie on my stomach since I was a little girl because it made my back uncomfortable, but lying on one side was usually okay. She said that would work, as long as I didn't lie on my back at all. At some point in our conversation, I glanced at the screen showing my lung x-ray and saw something like white cotton balls covering both lungs. I told her I would do my best. That day, my oxygen levels continued to drop until the next day. They kept increasing the oxygen machine's input until it reached the maximum. The next step would be to intubate me, and I was doing everything possible to avoid it. My pulse rate also started to drop. Within the first 48 hours there, my condition went from bad to extremely bad. I became extremely weak, unable to eat anything, and the coughing became more severe. The nurse came in again, explaining that lying on my stomach would be very helpful. Eventually, I figured out a way, putting my feet at the edge of the bed, leaning my body forward onto my meal tray table, extending my arms, holding the position for 5 minutes each time to relieve pressure on my lungs from the back. I basically lost the concept of time in the first few days, unsure if it was the second or third night in the ICU, at which point I was at my weakest. Alarms kept sounding as my pulse rate dropped to the 40s, making it nearly impossible for me to sleep. I remember sitting semi-upright, slightly turning to the left. I sensed something and saw a bright light on the right, warm and comforting. I remember thinking or saying to myself, "No, I'm too tired," not wanting to admit or believe it was real. Then that light caught my attention again, and even with my eyes closed, the light on the right was too bright, so I turned slightly towards it. I could see long golden-orange hair with no face, but next to it was a bright white figure. I realized and felt it was an angel. I felt safe, calm, completely focused on the moment, where we were going. I didn't move or speak, but I knew I was content and willing to follow her. What I saw next, with my angel by my side, was a dark room that looked like a large swimming pool, with darkness on the left. Inside was a dimly lit indoor pool, a cement pathway on the right, surrounded by a curving wall, dark, but the reflection of deep blue water on the right wall, as if illuminated by pool lights, created soft white ripples. I was so focused on the right wall that I didn't notice what was above us or if there were boundaries on the left side of the pool. As I concentrated on the water reflecting on the right wall, I saw my mother's face, starting from her shoulders to the top of her head. To her right was my father, followed by our family friend Dennis, then my friend and colleague Jan, with a man behind her whom I had never seen, but I knew he was Jan's husband. They all looked 10 to 20 years younger, smiling, calm, and looking well. My mother passed away in 2010, my father in 2014, Dennis in early 2020, and Jan in the summer of 2020. Each of them died due to serious health issues unrelated to COVID. Jan's husband took his own life on December 4, 2021, the Saturday just before I was admitted to the hospital. Looking at them on the wall behind the water's reflection, they looked whole and were all smiling. Even though they didn't speak, I could sense their happiness, joy, and a feeling of complete well-being. After focusing on each person, they each gave me a message that I heard without anyone speaking. After each one spoke to me, I slowly moved forward with the angel. The first voice and message I heard were from my mother, telling me she was fine, happy, and everything was well. My father let me know he was happy and fulfilled. Dennis wanted me to tell everyone that he was well, happy, and not to judge his wife Lila. He said it wasn't her fault. She did everything she could and followed everything she should have done. He also said he hoped she would get everything, that it was his time. He left because he was tired of battling cancer. Jan told me she was happy, no longer in pain, and not worried anymore. She said it didn't matter even though her husband had taken his own life. She explained that he had done everything he could, trying to stay as long as possible, but couldn't endure it any longer. She said he was fine there, with her, and everything was okay. I could feel she sensed my concerns about his suicide. She reassured me that he was fine and there was nothing wrong with him. I knew and felt that everything was okay. I felt they were just telling me not to worry, everything was really okay. I began to feel that we were moving forward, my angel and I, into a bright new realm. It was as if we had moved onto a cloud, an area filled with fluffy white light, a faint golden white light, and a silvery white light, except for a small part of light blue on the far left, somewhat resembling the sky, surrounded by a layer of gently drifting white mist. My attention was drawn to the right, and I saw a very tall luminous being with more radiance behind it. My initial thought was that it was a tall angel, and as I approached this luminous being, it turned to face me. It seemed to have a robe or luminous garment with a hood. As it leaned towards me to greet me, I felt safe, calm, and even joyful. It began to reveal its face. As I looked at its face, I asked in my mind who it was, and it slowly moved the hood away, revealing her face. As she unveiled her face, I recognized her as the Virgin Mary. I felt surprised and even asked in my mind, "Virgin Mary, is it really the Virgin Mary?" She nodded, smiling, and answered yes. I even laughed because I never expected or thought I would be welcomed by the Virgin Mary on the other side. Being in her presence made me feel incredibly happy and honored. She pointed with a smile to a very bright radiance on her right. I turned to face it, engulfed in a feeling of pure love. It was an overwhelming, all-encompassing sensation. I became like a child, standing there, watching myself bathed in this pure radiance. With my attention, it became even brighter and more immense. I knew I was in the presence of divine love, God, the source of energy. I felt at home, understanding everything. We are all one, forever connected, never separated from the source. Too much information flooded me at once. No fear, no judgment, only pure love. I never felt like I was destined to cross over, but felt that everything was planned, a part of my evolution. I experienced everything according to a predetermined plan. I was reminded that I am a light worker, seeing my true form, a large angel with massive golden wings, dressed entirely in white. I felt so light and joyful, being informed that I would recover from the COVID-19. Meanwhile, I also knew that whether I departed or returned, my family would be okay, but I was returning. I was reminded to convey the message to others not to fear, not to judge others, especially in situations related to illness. Next, I felt that I was returning from the light. I sensed many of my deceased pets were now with me, all safe and aware that I would see them again when I returned. I felt like I was returning through a misty cloud to reality, with my angel still with me. I didn't see her, but I knew and felt her presence. I opened my eyes and found myself back on the hospital bed. I felt weak and tired but extremely happy. In the following days, my health rapidly improved and my energy was returning. I could breathe more smoothly, gradually reducing the need for oxygen. I could walk on my own, eat, and drink. It was the first time since my arrival that I could take a shower by myself. 3 days later, they discharged me. Several nurses told me they were pleased to see my quick recovery, calling me their star patient as I performed well. The doctors were also happy, giving me only 2 minor prescriptions before sending me home. When I entered the hospital, COVID had affected my lungs, heart, and kidneys, and they had considered platelet transfusion therapy for me. Additionally, they had contemplated intubation the night of my NDE but decided against it the next morning upon seeing my improvement. Leaving the hospital felt surreal. I realized that everything seemed to lack depth, appearing flat and dull in color. Driving home, I noticed the trees and everything seemed pale. For me, nothing felt real compared to the experience in the light. It's challenging to describe and put into words. When I returned home, everything felt bland and hazy, not as vividly real as before. As I embraced new activities, I found them very interesting as I grew stronger over the following weeks. Being able to lie in my bed brought immense joy, feeling as if I melted into a giant, soft velvet pillow. Going upstairs or into the next room took a lot of energy, but I improved every day. Everything was new to me. I remember sitting on the couch, feeling the blood flow in my legs' veins, experiencing the sensation from the inside out. It just felt heavy, but it became easier every day. Sometimes I could sense some pain, but not in the same way. It's hard to explain, as if I hadn't fully returned to this side. I felt a disconnect from others, almost a lack of empathy. Knowing what I saw, I was no longer afraid of anything, no longer worried or concerned about other people's dramas. I realized this and knew I needed to show them compassion or explain. In fact, it's not as bad as they think. Don't be afraid, don't judge, just know everything is okay. We are all loved, coming from the same source, just experiencing life in any role we choose. We are here to participate in life. If we make choices, we can choose a different path if we don't like where it leads us. We need to remember that our choices create ripples, but also understand that the people those ripples touch have the right to choose how those ripples affect them. We can always change our path, and we are only limited by what we believe. We are infinite, able to create everything we want or need because we are always connected to the source, never separated, always unconditionally loved. I remember sitting on the couch, looking at my hands, thinking how interesting and amazing they were. I felt very happy driving again, feeling like I was actually driving, almost like when I first drove alone in my teens. In stores, I could see people's faces partially covered by masks. When I looked into their eyes, I could see and feel their anger or fear, and I thought they had nothing to fear. None of this is truly real, not like the reality I saw and felt in the light. That was the real realm, as if we were virtual characters in a game, although important, just knowing it's not real and only temporary. About 5 to 6 weeks later, I suddenly felt completely back on the side. I admit I felt sad, although very grateful for the experience, happy to be with all my loved ones. I wrote down my notes in the months following the NDE, but it took me 9 months to finally go back, reread, and print them out. I am still adjusting and finding my way, but with a higher vibration frequency and a greater sense of gratitude because I know that since my NDE, I have lost several friends due to COVID vaccines, and other illnesses. I know those who passed are well, but for those who continue to live here, it is indeed difficult. We have never truly parted, and I often feel and hear the voices of those deceased from time to time. I also have a strong connection with my angel, and when I focus, I can sense angels around others. Life is truly an adventure worth experiencing.